And do they check you right at the border and you have, a travel visa and they just wave you through? Or because you're an American, you're a white dude, they start grilling you with questions? Are they automatically suspicious?
There were plenty of questions, but I had the entry permission before I entered, and I went to the Iraq side of the border, and I went into an office, and they looked at my passport and put information into a computer, and then I went across the river and went into another office on the Syrian side. An immigration official looked at my passport, put information into a computer, and that was how I went into Syria.
In what part of, do you remember specifically what part of Syria you crossed over in?
So this was at Faish Kabor in the northeast, and the northeast part of Syria is controlled by the Kurds, which have a relatively strong relationship with the U.S., especially in the fight against ISIS. So that was the way that I went with the credentials from the Kurds who were controlling that area.
And before all hell breaks loose and we get into the nightmare scenario that you unfold, what did you want to do in Syria? What was the goals of the trip?
So my plan was to stay for a few days. I was going to see some of the things to see in that area in Kamishli. I'm a lifelong Catholic, and my faith was a big part of my travel journey. So I planned to attend Mass on Sunday morning in the Kamishli area, and of course, my plans changed. But those were my general plans to stay for a few days and experience what I thought I could experience in a safe way.
And now let's get to the big reason, the book, Saving Sam, why you are here. You eventually get taken into custody or kidnapped, arrested, whatever you want to call it, by the government of Syria, Syrian agents. Walk us through starting that day. I'm sure you get up day like every other day. Walk the audience through how that event started to unfold.
So it was just 2 hours after I had arrived, and I was walking through a roundabout on the way to meet up with my guide when all of a sudden this black pickup truck abruptly pulled up next to me. Two armed men jumped out of the back seat and instructed me to get inside. And thankfully, they weren't violent, but I didn't have a choice. I was scared, confused. I had no information or anyone to help. It was desperately trying to understand what was happening. And it turns out that these men were loyal to the Syrian president, Bashar al-Assad, and told me that they were skeptical about my travel history and my travel motives. And as we sped down back alleys of the city, the officers in the vehicle, they accused me of espionage, of being an American spy and collaborating with terrorists. And as I mentioned, nothing like this had ever happened to me before.
And it at that point, are you trying to explain to them, I have proper paperwork, I'm allowed to be here? Are they interested in anything you have to say?
I was trying to explain to them that I am a traveler. I'm here to experience the country. I literally at one point told them, look at my Instagram, but all of this essentially fell on deaf ears. And it seemed as if they were going to ship me to Damascus and accuse me of these things, regardless of what I said.
And so let's take it step by step here. So these two guys got you. They're whipping down back roads. They're clearly they don't trust a word that's coming out of your mouth. At what point do you realize this is actually about to get extremely serious?
We pulled over on the side of the road, and the officer in the vehicle sitting next to me, he reached into his pocket and he pulled out a blindfold and put it over my eyes. And at that point, I realized that things were not going in a good direction. And the truck drove for about 5 minutes and then it stopped. And I stepped out of the vehicle and they took the blindfold off. And I remember I looked up and I was underneath a massive Syrian military airplane out on the tarmac of an airport. And they handcuffed me behind my back, took me over to the ladder, and threw me into the cargo hold of this plane. And about 30 minutes later, the plane took off. And sometimes what I find myself asking people when I tell the story is, how often have you been flying on an airplane and not known where the plane is going. And that was the
Zero.
situation I found myself in. This overwhelming cloud of uncertainty was growing all around me.
I do want to back up just a tiny, tiny bit here. When these two Syrian agents that say are loyal to Assad, when they first grabbed you, did you think that maybe they were ISIS or some other faction? Because for the audience who doesn't know, Syria is obviously not, there's different areas under different control of different people, right? So was there any fear that this might be ISIS fighters?
One of the biggest challenges I had was the language barrier because they weren't speaking English and they weren't able to, and they weren't willing to. And so I was very confused about who they were. I wasn't able to identify who they were. And it is a little bit unusual at that point to have Assad's troops in that part of the country, but I wasn't sure who it was. And frankly, for most of this initial period, I was just thinking that this was a big mistake. And I was thought, I don't know who these people are. I don't know what they want. I don't know what's going on, but this is a mistake and it's going to get figured out. And it didn't get figured out in the way that I thought it was going to.
Absolutely. So back to the plane. So you're flying. You have no idea where you're going at this point. You're in the cargo hold of this military aircraft. Can you hear people talking around you, or are you just completely isolated?
I was put in this little nook in the plane, and there were a few people around. There was a guy kind of watching me a little bit, but that's all that I could really see. And I was trying to remain kind of positive, trying to maintain some kind of emotional stability, but I realized that things were not seemingly going in a very good direction, and I was becoming pretty scared.
And how long was this plane from where you were to wherever it ultimately ends up landing?
The plane flew for about 90 minutes, and we landed in what I learned to be Damascus, the Syrian capital city. And when we landed, I was taken from there, driven into the center of town, and taken into the basement of a facility that I now know is called Syria's military intelligence prison number 215, a facility notoriously known for housing political prisoners. And I'll never forget the officer in charge. He spoke a little bit of English, and he escorted me to a cell in the back of the basement. And when he put me in there, he went to the inside of the cell door and he said, food, water, toilet, knock. Otherwise, quiet, no talking. And he slammed the door and left.
That is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Was the demeanor of the guards or that guy, the people that are in this prison handling you, what was their demeanor? Because now they've got their hands on an American who they think, I believe we're going to explain, they think you're an American intelligence asset. How was their body language? How were they behaving?
I was stunned and in disbelief about what had happened in just a few short hours. My life had spiraled out of control in the most terrifying of ways. And to answer your question, they made me feel exactly the way they wanted me to feel. Hopeless, utterly cut off from any control of my life.
I'm in a state of shock listening to how this goes. So at this point, they've got you in the prison. Now, I believe you eventually moved to a secondary prison, but while you're in this one, how long do they leave you before someone knocks on the door again and explains to you this is what's happening?
Yeah, thankfully the cell wasn't too small. I could walk around just a little bit, but it had no window. It was all concrete. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the concrete floor as a bed. And I remained here in solitary confinement for 27 days. And to answer your question, the only human interaction I had for the most part was just a few seconds in the morning and evening when the guards brought bread and boiled potatoes and water.
And I gotta ask because I'm curious, what does boiled potatoes and bread in a Syrian prison taste like?
It's a pretty simple, low calorie, basic diet, just kind of enough to exist. And occasionally I got a tomato, but that was pretty much everything that I had, and it was a very basic calorie intake.